Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you from whichever part of the world you're joining us from. And welcome to today's webinar title is Self-Service, the New Sexy for IT. Today's speaker is Stephen Mann, who is an independent IT service management content creator and a frequent blogger, writer, and presenter on the challenges faced by ITSM professionals. Now, without much further ado, I would let Stephen take over. But before that, I would welcome your questions. So please feel free to put in whatever questions you have in the questions tab in GoToWebinar. And we would be mailing you guys the white paper. So watch out for that in your inboxes. Stephen, would like to take over?
Cool, thank you, Narain, and I'll get started with webinar content. Oh. So over the next 30 to 40 minutes, I'll start with some scene setting before talking to the drivers for and benefits of self-service. Then I'll talk about what self-service capability can include, plus how to assess an organization's, let's call it preparedness for self-service. I'll also show some stats on self-service success levels before covering the common barriers to success. Then finally, I'll get round to talking to some practical tips on how to increase the chances of self-service success. And then I'll finish with my key takeaways before we go into a Q&A session. So please log your questions as we go along. Now, in terms of the scene setting, it's worth stating that the self-service concept is nothing new. In fact, consumer world self-service is older than most of us, whether you want to look to the introduction of self-service supermarkets circa 1930, or from a technology self-service perspective, ATMs or cash machines as we call them in the UK in 1967. If you want to go really old school, you can go back to first century Greece when you could get water from vending machines. However, employee self-service capabilities didn't really appear until the start of the 2000s, and often with a human resources bias, offering employees the ability to fill out timesheets, to apply for leave, or to check their status in HR records. In terms of IT, though, the real growth in demand for self-service capabilities came with the introduction of ITV3 in 2007. And since then, interest in and adoption of IT self-service has continued to grow as a means of solving a number of issues faced by service desks and, of course, the wider IT organization. In fact, I tend to think that self-service continues to be the new black for IT service management. And in 2015, in a 2015 HDI report called Support Center Practices and Salary Report, self-service was shown to be the fifth most valuable service desk technology after, as you'd guess, incident management, knowledge management, remote control, which is a bit of a strange one, and customer satisfaction surveying, with the 2014 version of that same report showing that 35% of organizations already use self-service technology and they've no plans to replace or update it. Another 24% use self-service technology, but they do plan to replace or update it. And another 23% plan to add it. So quite a big proportion of the 100% there. And more recently in the 2015 report, the numbers didn't really change. There was a similar balance with 34, 26, and 25% respectively. But probably more interestingly and looking forward, a future STI surveying report about the life on the service desk in 2016 will show that self-service and customer experience will be a key focus in 2016. Also, please note with this that this is an early version of the survey results, and STI will have a more complete result hopefully pretty soon. But the question for me is, why are so many organizations adopting self-service, and what are they actually adopting? And more importantly, are they succeeding with their self-service initiatives, or is there still more work to be done? And jumping back to the HDI numbers, for me, they certainly flag up a concern over the suitability of existing self-service technologies. But is this really the main issue, and what else needs to be addressed? And hence, this is hopefully an interesting story arc for the rest of the webinar. So I'll come back to those issues pretty shortly. And first of all, I'd like to talk about self-service benefits, or at least the potential self-service benefits. So in my experience, self-service, particularly self-service technology, is often touted as a way for cash-strapped IT organizations with overworked service desks to save time and money. However, cost savings are not the only driver for self-service, and for many, it's not the most important, with the most commonly quoted and sought after benefits including, and these are in no particular order, as I've already mentioned, firstly, cost savings. The concept is that self-service saves IT money by letting the end user do what the what the service desk previously did, whether it be the capture of incident or service request information or full-blown self-help through the use of a knowledge base. However, for me, there are a number of important things to bear in mind from a cost savings perspective. Firstly, self-service needs a certain level of end-user adoption to actually save IT and the business money. And with minimal adoption, the self-service project might not even break even. Secondly, self-service needs to be more than a telephone call or email replacement, as the real cost savings from self-service lie in the use of back-end workflow and automation, and also better decision-making through insight into supply, demand, and the financial aspects. The second bullet on here is improved availability and efficiency. It's interesting that HDI reports 74% of support centres aren't staffed around the clock, both in 2014 and in 2015. The self-service provides increased support availability out of hours, even if only for the simpler of IT issues, the most simple of IT issues. But self-service availability also goes beyond single geography time zone limitations, also providing support for more languages and time zones at a far lower cost than employing native language speakers across these global organizations. In terms of the increased efficiency, self-service can benefit both service desk agents and end users, but the real efficiency benefits will of course only be realized from that back-end workflow and automation again, to speed up issue resolution and service delivery. In terms of easing service desk workloads, end user self-help via a knowledge base can obviously result in fewer calls to the service desk, given a reduction in ticket volumes and thus in service desk workload. Then the self-service logging of issues and requests, as with end user contact via email, doesn't always require an immediate service desk response, and consequently the service desk can work on self-service created tickets at less busy times of the day, of course, as long as priority levels and service level targets are still being met. In terms of better prioritization of issues and requests, the telephone contact and the modern appetite for first contact resolution means that many service desks have actually drifted away from dealing with issues and requests based on priority, with it now being more of a first in, first out operation, where end users are dealt with on a first come, first served basis, rather than based on any form of intelligent differentiation. So self-service adds prioritization back in. Firstly, as outlined in my last point, the immediacy response is lost in favour of addressing the most important tickets first. And secondly, self-help removes many of the simpler and potentially less important service desk contacts to allow the service desk to spend more time on the more complex and potentially more important issues, with self-service password reset a great example of this. And then finally, the last point on my slide, self-service also helps the IT organization and the service desk to keep up with consumerization and delivering an improved customer experience. Because, like it or not, end users are doing more than bringing in their personal IT to the workplace. They're also bringing in their personal consumer world expectations of IT, technical support, and customer service per se. So, in terms of access and communication channels, employees are now expecting to see consumer-grade self-service capabilities, including issue logging, service request catalogs, and also knowledge availability for self-help, and all of this in the workplace. Plus, of course, anytime, any place, and any device access to services, information, and help via their numerous mobile devices. So, while self-service cost savings are important, the non-financial benefits can be important too. And this slide shows some of the top benefits of self-service as voted on by an August 15 HDI research brief called Technology for Empowering End Users. And as you'll see, the improved customer satisfaction and also the improved perception of IT are in there in the top three, with the thankfully the more efficient support. And it's also important for me, I think, to view self-service as a capability, not a technology, given that as with the growth in smartphone and mobile app use, the self-service technology is becoming less obvious and less important, less visible to the end user. And what is instead more important are the offered capabilities and the ease of access and use. For example, and continuing with that smartphone analogy, a mobile phone app providing train times and real-time status updates probably isn't considered software or technology by its users anymore. I mean, I know when I use my phone, I tend not to think of it as technology. Instead, it's just a capability. It merely provides the information that's needed when it's needed. And self-service is pretty similar. While the corporate IT organization might see self-service as a mix of self-service applications and then, of course, compute, storage, and networking, those who use it will most likely see it as a capability through which they can access, again, help, information, and services. So for me, it's wiser to think of self-service as a capability or even as a set of capabilities than a mix of technologies. And those self-service capabilities can include a number of things. In fact, so many things that I've got 2 slides rather than 1. You've got some of the most obvious things, self-help via access to FAQs and other helpful information, which might be how-to guides, common fixes, workarounds for known problems, and even the use of videos, perhaps YouTube videos, for those that prefer visual rather than written assistance. Then, of course, the ability to log issues and requests for resolution by IT personnel rather than self-resolution, ideally saving both the end user and the service desk, but ultimately the business time, especially if the telephone channel involves queuing. Status checking, the ability for end users to self-check the status of their incident or incidents or even service requests, again saving time and potentially money. Broadcast alerts, password reset capabilities. Chat, I find an interesting one, that people might say to me that chat isn't a self-service technology, and I'll agree with them. It's not a self-service technology, but there's no reason why it can't be a self-service capability to provide access to service desk agents as needed, as sometimes human-to-human interactions are needed to help understanding, to expedite matters. And for the end user, it can be a lot quicker than waiting in the telephone queue, say, or for an email to be responded to. And the service desk agent can, of course, handle multiple chats simultaneously rather than a single telephone call. Also, collaboration with other end users, whether it be communities, forums, wikis, or other peer support mechanisms. Also, access to IT asset information, allowing end users to understand what kit they have, potentially against a checklist of what their role should have. And it also offers organizations the ability to get end users to remotely participate in asset audits, downloads, links to handy external sites, other capabilities. And the final point, really, I should have underlined it or made it bold, because the use of as much automation as possible for service performance and incident resolution and even update notification, that really is where much of the efficiency and cost benefits lie. So there are benefits to be reaped via a number of different self-service capabilities, but you have to ask the question, is your organization ready for self-service success? Or if you're attending this webinar after an unsuccessful self-service initiative, was your organization ready for its self-service launch? Now, an organization might have spent a considerable amount of time, money, and thought selecting the right self-service technology. It might also have invested in ensuring that the self-service capability is something that end users would want to use. But end users still might not use it, not because they don't want to use it, not even because it's difficult to use, but because they can't find the help they need, or because what they do find doesn't actually help them. There are barriers to people coming back and using it. For me, it's the equivalent to buying a new car, teaching someone to drive, and perhaps even the benefits of driving, but failing to fill the tank with fuel. So self-service readiness is about more than the technology, and also about more than the education of end users. It's about ensuring that there's sufficient fuel, especially for self-help, to power the required journey. And also it's important to avoid the barriers in using the tips that I'll mention shortly. But I think it's worth talking about a concept called Level 0 Solvable, LZS first. I say it was new to me, to be honest, until pretty recently, that a common mistake made by organizations implementing self-help is launching a knowledge base before it's truly fit for purpose. The knowledge base might house lots of content that has been created with love, but if the right knowledge article can't be found, understood, and then used for self-help, then there might as well not be any knowledge articles. Plus, there's the issue of insufficient knowledge article coverage across the spectrum of common end-user issues. And this is where LZS can help. So it's a measure. It's the percentage of incidents hitting the service desk that could have been resolved by the end user via self-help. And the LZS calculation can be used to gauge the chances of self-service success by predicting the level of end-user success with the knowledge base. Might sound complicated, but if organizations can reduce the risk of end users thinking that the self-service, or more specifically the self-help capability, is useless, for want of a better word, then it will increase the probability that end users will use it again. Conversely, if an end user finds self-help to be of little or no value, then they'll most likely not return to the self-service capability. But it's important to remember that just because there's an available knowledge article, it doesn't mean that the issue can be flagged as LZS. Now, you can ask, or you can assess whether end users can find the right articles when searching for help, using their language and terminology rather than IT's. So we might think we've created a suitable knowledge article, but it's anything but suitable in terms of being found and being used. So just to dive a little deeper into this, there are two options to calculate the LZS metric, where one might slow down service desk operations and the other might be seen as a duplication of effort. The first requires service desk agents to search the self-help knowledge base while dealing with end user issues, as though they were the end user themselves, trying to solve the issue via self-help. If the end user issue can be resolved using an available knowledge article, then the incident can be flagged as LZS. So a service desk will have 40% LZS, say, if 4 out of every 10 issues handled could have been solved by the end user using self-service. Alternatively, to save the service desk agent time and to reduce the operational impact of the approach, the LZS metric can be calculated by project staff on a sample basis. Now, either way, the higher the LZS metric is or gets, the higher probability that end users will use self-service successfully and continue to return to it in the future. So as this HDI graphic shows, you see that growth or increase in the percentage of incidents that are LZS, so they could have been solved by self-help or self-service. And then also the dotted red line, after the launch of the self-service capability, the LZS score will decrease as self-service adoption rises. So the majority of issues that are LZS are now hopefully being resolved through self-help and not finding themselves at the service desk. Okay. There's also an HDI paper on this which might make it a little bit clearer. If I was smart, I'd have included a link, but if you Google level 0 solvable and HDI, you should be able to find it via Google or any other good search engine. And I'm going to change gears now and talk to the self-service success bigger picture. That, as with, I guess, CMDB is a little old hat, but let's look at the history of the service catalog adoption, and let's call them failures that might have come with them. That it hasn't been easy for IT organizations to achieve self-service success. And by that, I mean real self-service success, rather than merely the implementation of self-service technology to time and on budget. That instead, self-service success needs to be judged on the difference it makes to business operations. So, for instance, not even the measure of end-user adoption levels is potentially not enough. In other words, end users might start out with a new self-service capability or use it if forced to, but it doesn't actually mean that the self-service capability is actually a success in terms of delivering business benefits. But having said that, adoption is a great place to start, as it's hard to achieve success without adoption or use by employees or end users, whatever you wish to call them. And it's interesting and also important to understand that the level of self-service success will vary by self-service capability. And again, these are HDI statistics based on HDI research, that password reset is the most successful self-service capability, according to HDI members, with 25% of organizations reporting password reset as great success in terms of uptake. However, if we look at the more bread and butter capabilities, only 50% of respondents rate their self-service online form capability, so the real self-service for submitting incidents and requests, as at least somewhat successful, with another 15% rating it as unsuccessful, and then you've got the 35% that are a little bit there, for want of a better word. And then finally, if we look at it through another lens, we looked at self-service, if we look at self-help, only 10% of organizations report great success with knowledge bases, and 30% report that they've been successful. So according to the most recent HDI stats, while 54% of organizations have implemented self-help knowledge bases, 1/3 of these have been successful, 1/3 have definitely been unsuccessful, and the final third have had middling results. So self-service success is a mixed bag, and we need to understand what is preventing that self-service success. For me, there are a number of areas that, if ignored or given insufficient attention, will derail or potentially wreck an organization's self-service initiative. We've already covered the lack of accessible and suitable knowledge articles as a big issue, but there are a number of other barriers that need to be addressed to increase an organization's chance of self-service success. These include, and it's by no means a finite list, the following 10 points, which I'll cover over 3 slides. The first is not learning from the mistakes of failed self-service initiatives. Now, while it's generally bad news that there have been so many, or far too many, self-service quotation mark failures, or they've not been as successful as they could be, there is at least a lot of learning to be had. So I think it's important to ensure that those involved with the self-service initiative consult with peers in other organizations and seek out other industry best practice, white papers, etc., to better understand what to do and what not to do when implementing self-service or introducing self-service. Implementing is probably a bad word to use. It has a taste of technology about it, and as I said earlier, I think we're trying to implement a capability here. Second barrier is that the self-service initiative is treated as a technology rather than a business project. For me, it's the same old, the let's buy a tool approach, where technology is introduced as the end rather than as a means to the end. And self-service won't deliver the required benefits across cost efficiency and customer experience and any other that you might want to reap if employees don't use it, or even if they don't use it enough. So it's important to understand what self-service success is in business terms and think self-service capability and management rather than just self-service capability. Sorry, I just had to pause for a Java update that probably would have killed the webinar. Third point is the lack of end user involvement. It's where the end users are unintentionally or even deliberately sometimes kept away from what should really be a business and people change project. With the delivered self-service capability, either not meeting end user needs or being too difficult for them to use. The IT organization might also unsuspectedly fall into the trap of creating the self-service capability that they would want to use. For me, it's the unfortunate result of not necessarily understanding end user wants and needs, and also how they think and work. The fourth barrier to be careful with is that the purpose, scope, and desired outcomes of self-service are misjudged. If you ask, what's the purpose of the self-service project? If the answer is something akin to implement self-service technology to allow end users to help themselves, then I would suggest that the IT organization in question needs to revisit the justification stage of their initiative, because to me that's a little bit too shallow. You're talking technology and helping themselves. There there's not enough granularity to that. The fifth point, insufficient planning for day-to-day operations. I don't think I really need to say too much more on that. I think the point itself is pretty explanatory. And then the sixth barrier is not addressing people change issues. And it's one where it's probably a webinar in itself, to be honest. It's the usual suspects for organizational change management, from lack of communication, involvement, buying, education, and also the need not only to do all those things, but to do, well, training, and also more communication and training as you go along. Because with self-service, unless a company has an autocratic leadership style and people do what they're told, end users need to know what's in it for them before they embrace the change. And of course, if that change makes it harder for them to do their jobs, or in the case of self-service, to get what they need to do with their jobs, then that change is not going to be embraced. The seventh out of the 10 barriers is that self-service can be viewed solely as a cost-saving replacement for telephone access. And in many ways, it ties into point 8, the insufficient use of automation, that just using self-service to replace end-user phone calls to the service desk is suboptimal in terms of improving cost, speed, and quality of service, as I've already spoken of a couple of times. Now, instead, workflow and automation is where much of that workload reduction, efficiency gains, cost savings, and service improvements lie. And I'll return to this when I come back to the tips. The ninth barrier, and sorry if this is a long list, but for me it's worth getting them all out there, is launch apathy. It's where the self-service capability is made available by IT, maybe even with somewhat of a fanfare. Here's the new self-service capability. But unfortunately, the launch is more about the technology being successfully implemented, or the measure of the success of the launch, and now that technology being available, than it is about having a capability that end users want to and ultimately do use. It's as though the IT project machine has merely ticked off the fact that the self-service technology has been delivered, and they can now go their merry way and deliver their next technology project. Not only does this approach commonly fail to reap the promised benefits of the self-service investment, because nobody uses it or very few people use it, it also casts a long shadow over any future attempts to deliver a self-service capability, or at least one that works. And then finally, my 10th barrier is making a one-off attempt to encourage adoption. That we need to recognize that self-service capability is a living thing, and that it will flourish or die based on continued nurturing. So organizations need to continue to involve customers. They need to actively seek feedback, and also continue to be open to criticism. Plus, there's the need to monitor usage, as you would expect, to continue to improve knowledge articles, and also to offer additional end-user coaching and training where needed. And finally, organizations also need to consider and try different ways to increase self-service use and to improve ease of use. I don't know who's on the webinar and what they've already done from a self-service perspective, but it's not uncommon to speak to organizations where they're really struggling to get into double digits when it comes to self-service adoption. So, final leg now, onto the tips. And assuming that all of the 10 aforementioned success barriers have been considered and hopefully addressed, there are a number of other opportunities to increase the odds of self-service success. These include, but again, I'm sure there are many more, and people might want to chip in from a Q&A perspective. The first thing is investing in better knowledge management, and realizing that while it's about the process of capturing, distributing, and effectively using knowledge, it also requires cultural change to be truly effective. Knowledge capture, distribution, and use or reuse needs to be embedded in business process, plus also in employee recognition and reward frameworks if it's really going to work. Otherwise, there'll always be something that gets done in addition to and usually after the day job. Technology can help here, once the people and process-based needs have been considered and addressed, and don't forget the LZS approach to creating and refining those knowledge articles. The second tip is to offer choice. That self-service isn't going to be the best solution for end users all of the time. Firstly, some IT issues require a response that's more immediate than end users can receive from self-service. Secondly, individuals might have personal preferences for support access and communication channels. Something that is heavily influenced by ease of use and success rates. And thirdly, self-service might not be suitable for some roles. For example, very senior roles where self-service increases the business cost of IT support, and business critical roles where self-service can delay resolution and continued business operations. Whatever the scenario, end users shouldn't be forced down the route of self-service when it's not appropriate, with self-service offered as just one of many available access and communication channels. The third tip is supporting mobile access to self-service capabilities, in that access to corporate mobile app-based self-service capabilities is not as prevalent as online self-service portals. On average, only 1/4 of the organization that offer any form of password reset, knowledge base, or even status checking via online self-service portal offer a similar service via mobile app, and that's an AGI stat again. The fourth tip is recognizing the difference between UI and UX. A big part of self-service success is user experience. If end users find self-service capabilities intuitive and easy to use, then they'll most likely use them again and again and hopefully again. So those responsible for the self-service delivery project need to differentiate between the sexy technology with a great-looking user interface and how the end user uses and experiences the technology or capability. Ideally, every end user touch point should be optimized for the best possible user experience, with this equally applicable to mobile apps as it is to online self-service portals even, apologies. So, final 4 tips. Tip 5 is using fit-for-purpose technology. And I've sort of already touched this in some way, that while having the right functional capabilities front of house, and in particular having that intuitiveness and ease of use, it's just as important to have the back-end non-functional capabilities in place too. Then we have offering. Oh, this is odd. My slide seems to be the same, so apologies. I'll keep talking. Please ignore the slide for now. But the 6th bullet should have been exploiting existing corporate automation capabilities. In fact, I'm just going to check to see if the next slide, no, it doesn't. Apologies, that slide's gone a bit haywire. The 6th bullet is exploiting existing corporate automation capabilities. That, as I've already mentioned numerous times, many of the big ticket self-service benefits are tied to the use of workflow and automation. However, self-service automation shouldn't require the reinvention of the proverbial wheel. That in fact the opposite is true, that self-service initiatives should piggyback the corporate automation strategy, seeking out existing technologies and also IT skills that could be reapplied to self-service scenarios. Number 7 is looking ahead to self-service opportunities outside of IT. And this isn't a case of running before you can walk, it's merely the high-level planning of how the organization's investment in self-service could be extended to other corporate service providers such as HR, facilities, and legal. Such planning might help to justify increased investment and make the phased delivery of certain self-service capabilities more logical. For instance, HR would benefit from self-help knowledge base, issue logging and chat, but they're probably not going to benefit from password reset or even download capabilities. And then my final tip, number 8, is starting with a friendly pilot group. It's pretty obvious, but no matter how well the self-service project progresses, there will always be teething issues during testing and even at launch. So my advice is not to take a big bang approach, both in terms of what's initially offered and to whom it's offered to. Instead, it's best to pilot the new self-service capabilities with a group of, let's call them friendly end users, who will understand if things don't always work first time, and who will also be able to offer up suggestions on how to improve the initial self-service capabilities. So try to make early mistakes privately rather than in public, and try to deliver one thing well rather than 2 things badly. As mentioned earlier, a failed first self-service launch attempt casts a long shadow over any future attempts. So that was my quick run through the main barriers to successful self-service, which of course can be flipped into positive actions, and plus other things that can help with success, my 8 tips. And I'll leave you with some key takeaways now before we hit the Q&A. Now, the first is that self-service success is there to be had, but only if you really work for it. That there's a need to understand that self-service is about offering new capabilities than it is, more about offering new capabilities than it is about implementing new technologies. And that organizations need to assess their level of preparedness for self-service. And probably one of the most important things is to appreciate that there are so many barriers to self-service success. So please be prepared to research, to consider, to address, and hopefully to traverse the barriers to increase the chances of success in your organization. That we need to make sure that while self-service is somewhat sexy, we need to make sure that it also delivers on its potential. And it can only do this if employees actually use it. So that's my slides done. Lorraine, hopefully we have a few questions.
Yes, we do. Let me just we have quite a few questions. All right. So this refers to one of your initial slides, Stephen. So what happens if you just do self-service to save money? This from Alice.
Yeah, I'm, I'm not saying that you can't do it to save money. I think what I'm trying to say is that having a laser focus on saving money, it might work, but it might not. The thing to remember that is that the self-service will only save money if people use it. So to start a self-service initiative and have that laser focus on saving money, you're not looking at the what's in it for me, for the end user or the employee. So what we need to do is to design it with attention to the UX, user experience, or even customer experience, such that we can actually get people to use it. And obviously, the more that they use it, the more we can potentially save, the bigger efficiencies that we can make, and ultimately the better customer experience we can have, as well as service requests are handled more quickly, issues are resolved more quickly, and also end users or employees, they do want that consumer-like experience that they might get with the Amazons of this world as well. So it's a difficult one. People have to have a legitimate business reason for a change initiative or a change project. So, by all means, do the calculations, work out how the workflow and automation is going to save you money. But if that's all you do, I really do think you're increasing the chances of the initiative not being as successful as it should be, or even not being successful at all. Sorry, a long-winded answer. Hopefully I got the point across.
The next question has got something to do with. Now you mentioned Amazon's great experience. So surely our personal life use of online self-service will make it work at work.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think so. Um, but I think what we have to do here is ask the question, how does the corporate self-service capability stack up? If that self-service capability is hard to use at work, or even if a personal life self-service capability is hard to use, we probably won't use it. We'll probably revert to the telephone, or in my case, I'm a little bit moany. I occasionally write letters still as well, if I need to get things done and other things aren't helping. So I don't think it matters whether it's workplace or personal. That if we don't get that user experience right, we're not going to succeed. That we can't go, we use Amazon and it works, therefore we will use something similar to Amazon in the workplace, QED, because it's not necessarily going to be the same as Amazon. It's not necessarily going to have the same intuitiveness, ease of use, you might not have the logical element. And at the back end as well, you might not have the workflow automation. From a customer support perspective, you might not have the same sort of ethos as Amazon has, particularly via a self-service point of view. So, so while consumer experiences have made it potentially easier to entice employees to self-service, they're only going to use it if it is what they want to use. If I look at my personal experiences, for instance, there are some suppliers where I use self-service, so Amazon is a good one. There are others where I'll email, there are others where I telephone, there are others where I use chat. So it comes back to my point about choice, that if it's not easy to use a supplier's self-service capability, I'm going to use another way to get in touch with them. Again, apologies, a long-winded answer there.
All right, and okay, this is a question from your namesake, and this borders along one of my favorite areas, right? So, how do we sell self-service technology to other departments?
Okay, the main thing for me is to sell it in a practical way. That to try and sell the theory to people is pretty difficult. So the way to sell it is to show how it benefits. Show how it benefits the business functions involved. It might be a case of, let's call this enterprise service management, so self-service as an element of enterprise service management. That we can well, firstly, people who work in other business functions such as personnel, they will be customers or end users of IT, so they'll be looking at the self-service capability that IT now offers, and hopefully, if they're savvy, they'll be thinking, why aren't we using something like this in HR or facilities or complaints management or whatever? So, show how it works in IT and what the benefits are to both IT and also to employees. But if you're just starting with self-service and you do want to get that other department involvement earlier on, for me, it's important to point to other companies and to show what they've done. I mean, you might be able to speak to your IT service management solution vendor to ask how their tool or their solution has been used in other organizations and get them to put you in touch with other customers where there's no conflict of interest. And they'd be quite happy to talk to how they've benefited using self-service outside of IT. Plus, it's also important to quantify the benefits, and that's to quantify the benefits in business terms. So, dollars or pounds, yen, whatever your currency is. Also, customer satisfaction, those sorts of things. So it's not just a case of it's a great idea to use this technology, to use the capabilities elsewhere within the organizations, but justify it. Allow HR in this instance to justify it to themselves, and hopefully they'll be able to see that it's going to be well worth their while in terms of improving efficiency, reducing costs, providing a better experience to the employees that will consume the HR services.
All right. Okay, this is okay. We have been getting we have two questions about the same thing. It's about when you mentioned that chat is a self-service technology. So, yeah, since when is chat self-service technology?
Okay, probably I didn't make myself clear. I included it in a list of self-service capabilities rather than self-service technologies. So that person's right that chat isn't really a self-service technology, but instead I think it is wise to have it in your portfolio of self-service capabilities, either within the self-service portal as a one-dimensional launch for chat. It doesn't actually have to be an integrated part of the overall self-service capability, or it can be something that complements other self-service capabilities. As I try to articulate, that you might wish to have chat there. For instance, if somebody is trying to purchase a service or subscribe to a service via a service request catalog as part of the bigger self-service portal, they might not entirely know what's right for them. So they might have a question. So fire up chat, quick question, thank you very much, and then they can continue with their service request via self-service capability. So to me, chat in many ways is sort of like a complementary part of that bigger self-service capability.
All right, thank you. And okay, this is a pretty fundamental question. Where do we get started with self-service? How do we start?
Okay, it's probably going to sound a bit of a cliche, this, in that self-service, starting with self-service isn't a case of, let's start with knowledge management and self-help, that you're almost jumping to the solution before defining the problem or the opportunity, that it is better to understand which pain points need addressing or which opportunities are there to be taken with your organization, and then that will hopefully drive which self-service capabilities will be most beneficial, and you can then, hopefully taking a phased approach, bring in those capabilities in the order that delivers maximum benefit to the organization. So it is a little bit cliched and the sort of thing that an ITSM consultant or a consultant of any type will say, but I truly believe that that is the best place to start, to really understand the ecosystem and the potential, and then to plan out what you deliver with self-service when. And that also applies to the earlier question of, selling self-service technology to other departments. That's part of that, starting with self-service ideally, working out where self-service can be extended beyond IT, working it out up front rather than as a tail end add-on once IT has all its self-service done and dusted.
Great, thank you. We'll take one more question. In fact, I would like to club two questions into one. So, is end user self-source adoption really as bad? And the other question is, why is adoption bad?
Okay. The important thing to recognize is that self-service adoption is getting better, that people are learning from the mistakes of old, that, as I mentioned, the old way of introducing self-service was to deliver the self-service technology to the organization, and I think we call it the field of dreams approach, the build it and they will come approach, that you just drop it in and you expect people to use it. And then, not unsurprisingly, we'll speak to customers who will be struggling to get up to double digits in terms of self-service adoption. That's one end of the spectrum. You can go to the other end of the spectrum. Well, of course, you can have organizations where they remove all other capabilities, so you have to go via self-service. But if we assume people have a choice, you do see organizations that can have as high as 75% of service desk contacts coming in via self-service, and of course, a lot of the work that's done by self-service can be hidden by the fact that people are helping themselves. So self-service adoption has been bad, and I think still continues to be bad for organizations that haven't really thought about how they're going to get employees to use self-service. And in terms of increasing the level of self-service adoption, it really is about, well, if you've not done it yet, making sure that you fully think out how you're going to get people to use it, to involve those people in the genesis and creation of the self-service capability. If you've already got a self-service capability that people aren't using, then it really is as simple as trying to find out why people aren't using it. And it probably will be many, if not all, of the things that I've said, that it might be easier and quicker to actually phone up the service desk, or people don't actually understand how to get the most out of self-service, how to use it. Our attention spans these days are extremely short. So if we can't go to self-service, get an answer quickly, then we probably aren't going to pick up the phone, because we know historically that even though we might listen to the whole music for 5 minutes, that we're probably going to get a quick response once somebody picks up the phone at the other end. So I'm optimistic that we are going to get better, but I'm still a little bit pessimistic that organizations or some organizations still will make the same mistakes that were being made 5 years ago. And they will ultimately end up with, at best, sort of somewhere between 10 to 20% adoption of self-service.
Thanks, Stephen. We have a couple of, in fact, we have three questions from people asking about the fresh services, self-service capabilities. And now, since we have a number of questions, I thought I'll just spend 2 minutes quickly talking about fresh service and self-service. Unfortunately, I don't have any slides or screen shots with me to share with you, but I'll quickly spend 2 minutes. So Freshservice ships with a nice self-service portal where end users can raise instance and they can also track earlier tickets and they'll be able to get notifications just like you get in Facebook. And you can also request for new services through our service catalog, and you can access and search for knowledge based articles. Now, the cool thing about this services portal and fresh services, if you have a solid knowledge base database, then as and when your end user is typing out an incident or is filling out a ticket form, then based on the keywords type, we automatically throw up knowledge base articles. So this is a pretty nice feature to have. And in fact, a lot of our customers have seen tremendous success in this as they're able to really reduce the load on the IT team by letting users solve their issues on their own by throwing useful knowledge-based links even as they're typing their uh, incidents tickets out. I really recommend that you visit the freshservice.com/sign up and check out the fresh service. Um, we have a 30-day free trial. So if you have any questions, please write to us at hello@freshservice.com, and we'll be really happy to help you guys out. Thank you, Stephen. We really enjoyed having you over, and thank you guys for joining us. I really hope you guys had a great time. So please, if you have any questions, please tweet to us at Freshservice app and mail us at hello@freshservice.com. And we'll see you guys again at a webinar pretty soon. And till then, have a great time. Bye bye.